Are you the kind of person that spends more time decorating and organizing your study cue cards and spend a little bit less time actually memorizing what's on the cue cards? Or perhaps you're the kind of person that really struggles to understand what somebody is saying when they speak in a different accent, even if they're speaking English. Or perhaps you're the kind of person that starts to tell a story and they're really excited about it, but when they want to elaborate about a certain point, they just cannot find that information in their brain. They know it's there, they just can't seem to reach it. But they know it's there, they just can't, for some reason, fetch it and use it. If any of these things are true for you, then today's podcast is going to be really interesting. Hello everybody, and welcome to Neurodiversity Support podcast. I'm your host, Annika, a local neurodivergent and neurodiversity specialist. Today we are speaking about a really interesting topic. If you are a mother, a working class person, literally anybody, but mostly I guess especially if you're a student, because we're speaking about information processing. So information processing is a little bit of a tongue twister for my dyslexic mouth, but anyway, the reason why it's so interesting is because we are all processing information all the time. Whenever I say to people information processing, I guess the first thing they think of is studying, but that is, on purpose information processing, if I'm going to put it that way. I'm talking about information processing whole day, every day. So the way that I put that into perspective is a baby that is born has muscles, right? They do have muscles. And as they get a little bit stronger, they can keep their head up from going bloop when you pick them up. And maybe they start holding their bottle and their muscles start to develop. And you use your muscles to do mundane things, live your life, eat your food, get dressed, smile, cry. You use your muscles for everything. But then when you get a little bit older and you're of age, then you decide to strengthen certain muscles and you go to gym, right? You decide, I'm going to be an athlete of running. I'm going to be a runner. And then you start exercising your legs. I don't know anything about sports. Sorry about that. I didn't know how to make that analogy. I'm going to be a bowler. I don't know, man. Dexels. Then I'm going to exercise that particular muscle. Then you gym. That's the point we're trying to get to. We're going to gym that muscle. And so information processing is the same. You use your brain all the time and it gets strong by itself without much effort from our side. But if we want to make it really strong, we will brain gym. And that's studying and doing academic work and going to school and etc. So we're going to talk about the basic component, the non-gym component of information processing. And then we're also going to talk about the brain gym component, which I guess will be very interesting for the students, especially the matrics, because prelims is on our heels, So let's get started. When psychology was developing, it kind of coincided with the time that the computer was being developed. And so when IBM released their first home size, because remember the computers were like building size first. I'm talking about a home size, a compact version of a computer that could be in people's homes. Psychologists of the time used that as a basis to understand or to parallel it with how the brain processes information. And that's kind of how information processing theory came about. So the information processing theory tries to equate how the brain processes information using the computer's version of processing information as a basis, but it is very applicable and I do like it because it's like, of all the theories in psychology, it's the most layman term theory because the brain's complex, bro. I'm not going to lie. The brain is incredible and marvelous and it's very complex. But when it's your first go understanding how the brain processes information, you don't want neuropsychology or neurology for that matter, you want to take small bites. So let's do the small bite theory. I do like information processing theory, so let's do it. The first step of how your brain would process information is to get a hold of the information. Where's the information coming from for it to process? How is information getting into the brain? And that is through our senses, right? That's going to be, I hear the car driving, so there's clearly going to be a car over there. I smell something. What is that? Fire? Do I smell fire? There must be a fire. Let me respond to that. Or I read my information. I can see things. I take in information all the time. There's the sun is bright. Let me close my eyes, Taste my food. And my personal favorite is touch, because touch is like the superhero of the senses, because it can feel depth, it can feel pressure, it can feel texture, and it can feel temperature. The other senses can't do all of that in one. So touch is definitely on top of the chain of sensory inputs. And then how that will all come together is through receptors. I receive the information and they send the signals up to the brain. So the sensory neurons send the information up to the brain, and the brain decides how it's going to respond to that. So the process of information entering the brain is umbrellaed under sensory memory. That's the first step of information processing theory, is information coming in through sensory memory. So once the information enters, there's a little filter that neurotypicals have. Most neurodivergents do not have this filter, or the filter kind of doesn't want to work as it should, or the way neurotypicals does. And what that filter does is it says, I'm trying to listen to Annika at the moment. Let me focus on that instead of the car that's driving past, instead of the information that I'm receiving from my skin feeling my jersey on me, instead of, I'm getting cold. The filter tells you what is important to pay attention to, right? The filter says this is actually more important than that. I need to use the bathroom. That's more important than listening to the lecturer at that very moment, because that's a bodily need. So the filter will say, we're going to bump this up to most important in the hierarchy of we need to pay attention because I need to go to the bathroom right now, instead of listening to the lecturer. So the filter plays a vital role in your everyday functioning of your perception of the world, but also in your brain gym, right? Because if you're trying to brain gym, when I say that, I'm trying to say you're trying to take in information on purpose. You're trying to remember information on purpose, right? When you're trying to brain gym and the person next to you sound leaks out of the earphones, that's distracting, bro. And your body's saying, what's happening? What? I'm trying to read what? And then that distracts you. So the filter plays a very important role, because if I'm going to brain gym and my brain says, okay, we're reading this thing, we're reading this textbook, and I smell smoke, and my filter doesn't say, that's important. There might be a fire somewhere. Let's go and see, life or death. We need to go check what's happening there. If the filter doesn't do what it's supposed to do, we're not functioning on an optimal level in the world, right? So what happens is the filter will choose what needs to go through. If we're going to say, here's a block and there's a little small passage between sensory memory going into working memory, a small passage. He's the doorkeeper to say, okay, walk through to the next room. You can go. Now, my ADHD's brain's bouncer that stands between sensory memory and working memory, he lets everybody in. He doesn't even check their IDs or anything. He's just like, go through. Because my filter is very friendly. My filter as an ADHD person is taking in everything all the time. And he's like, actually, that bird singing is so interesting. Hey, what about that child that's over there? Hey, what about that? He's taking in everything all at once. He doesn't discriminate. My filter is taking in every single sense all at once on the same level of importance. He's not a respecter of senses. I'll tell you that. And so when the information goes through, or the sensory input goes through to working memory, the working memory's job then is to take that information and process it. So where it's parallel to a computer is that it will create encoding. So I'm going to explain encoding in this way. When you go to the library and you say to the librarian, I'm looking for a really interesting read. I would like to read a book about children. Okay, about children or for children? About children. I want an adult read. Okay, so our adult reads are on this side of the library over here. And I'd like a child that decided to sue their parents. Oh yeah, here's all of our things of children suing their parents. I want it to be a female writer. Okay, yes, here's our subsection. And there will be a little spot in the library exactly on the spot there where that book belongs. And when I'm done reading the book, oh, thank you for the book, and I return it, she will then go and put that book exactly on that spot again. And how do we know where that book's home is? How do we know how to get there? Who knows? Does anybody know? At the back of the book, that was so teacher of me. There's nobody in my classroom, but I'm saying it. Does anybody know who wants to put up their hand? Oh my word. Sorry about that. Okay, so how we know that she... I even lost my train of thought now. Oh yes. How we know where the book's home is, where the book belongs, is at the back of the book. There's a little encoding there. There's a little code. I don't know the meaning of the code. I do think there's systems that libraries follow, but that's not the point. I think this book you can see it, has some encoding. I did buy this from my library, by the way. I didn't steal this. There's some encoding there, and that used to be the name of his address and his home in the library where he belonged. So when we could go and return it, he would go back to his home on his street address and he'd live there. Now that is long analogy to explain how the brain processes information. In the long-term memory, it will store it like that. But for it to be stored properly, we need to encode it properly in the working memory. So, I give an example of this. If I had to say to you now, it's raining. I wonder if you can hear it raining. Okay, and then I'm not going to edit it. I'm not going to edit that out because that was a perfect example of my filter not doing his job. I told you my filter is just non-discrimination. Just everybody's allowed to come in. So now the rain is distracting me, but okay. Anyway, so if I had to tell you, I would like you to remember the number to phone Neurodiversity. This is Neurodiversity's number. It's 079-393-6453. Please remember it for real. Try. Let's see if you can remember it. 079-393-6453. What are you doing when you're trying to remember it? You're repeating it to yourself. You're rehearsing it. 079-393-6453. You repeat it. You say it over and over and over. Because in the working memory, rehearsal is key. Trying to find categories of how you put information together and rehearsing it over and over is the way that you process it. And then you create encoding through rehearsal, which will store it into the long-term memory, right? Then that voice inside of your head, that little Annika, when I think I hear Annika's voice in there, and I don't know why she couldn't have a different accent. I don't know why it was so boring. Oh, because then I wouldn't understand her. But I was always like, I wish my inner voice had a different voice. So the working memory is essentially your voice in your head. That's when you talk to yourself. That's when you're having a dialogue with yourself and really processing the information. And to make sense of that, tell the younger children when we have to talk with the younger children about this, is that any tutor that you have or the teacher that you have gives you information. And if the information is an apple, right? I can give you the apple and I say, here's the apple, Johnny. Here's the apple. And you can take the apple and do nothing with it. Then you still just have the apple. You don't know what it tastes like and you're not digesting it. You're not getting any benefit from it. You just have it. You just have the apple. And that's kind of a lot of the times it happens when we're trying to do brain gym. We have the weights there. The weights are stacked, ready to go. But when you're trying to do the jerk, you're not picking it up. You're just staring at the weights. So how's your muscles going to get stronger? So if you have the apple, I could, as a tutor, try and spoon feed you if I wanted to. And I could bite it, and I could even be gross and chew it till it's fine and try and put it in your mouth so that it's easier for you to digest. And at the end of the day, you still have to taste it, chew it, get a feel for what you're tasting. Oh, this is an apple. I understand how that tastes. Oh, that makes sense of it, categorize it, and then swallow it. I can't swallow your food on your behalf or taste your food on your behalf. And that is why information processing is an inside job. Nobody can do that for you. There's no tutor on earth that can do that for a student. Do you know, it's the best example of information processing is schoolwork, right? So when you're chewing the apple and then when you swallow it is essentially the analogy of when you make sense of it and you talk to yourself about the information. Do I understand this? What is this like? What can I compare this new information to? Is it like this? Can I make a rhyme with it that's with a familiar song? When you categorize it, you know then in what part of your brain you are encoding it. You're creating that code for that library. You're creating the pathway of the exact place where you're going to put that book in your long-term library. Does that make sense? So when the working memory is very important, but sometimes the working memory doesn't do what you want it to do because you overwork it. And now this part, I wish I could shout this louder, because sometimes people are very unfair with their working memory's capacity. The reason why I say that is a demonstration for those on YouTube. If this candle is the capacity of your brain, and I'm giving you new information in here, you see it's going till here, I still got a little bit left in there, and I keep on pouring new. Now I'm going to use my water bottle because this is a true demonstration, and I keep on pouring new information into my working memory. So from my sensory memory, I bring in more information. I pour it in and into my working memory. At what stage will my working memory swallow the apple and store it into the long-term memory? Because his capacity is only this big, not big at all. So what will happen is, if I carry on pouring in new information, what's going to happen to the information I haven't swallowed and processed yet? He's going to chuck it out, dude. He's going to say, okay, we're getting new information. Let's empty the basket so we can take in new information. And that's what happens when people try to study, when they cramming it in, quote unquote, cramming it in. They're not cramming it in. They're basically like taking a pail where you're scooping out water out of the bucket and then just throwing it out and scooping it out and just throwing it out, because you're not throwing it into your long-term memory. You're just chucking it out. And that's the literal translation for in through one ear and out through the other, because you overexerting your working memory's capacity. So with the neurodivergence, that filter is not functioning as it ought to. It's difficult to manage what is pouring into the working memory. What is the thing that I'm focusing on? And that is where a lot of people get a little bit confused about learning styles, because they aren't learning styles. You're clearly using all of your senses all of the time. The key of the learning styles is the more senses you use, the more parallel neuro pathways you are creating, the more sensory inputs you are getting, all bringing the same information into the working memory, meaning that the possibility for the filter to be confused or distracted by other sensory inputs is minimized. Do you understand what I mean? So if I'm studying and I have dyslexia, so I struggle to read, so I put my PDF on read aloud, so I'm listening to it, but I continue to read with it, and I write, I take notes while I'm listening. I'm maximizing all of my sensory inputs to process one stream of information, so that when my filter is trying to infiltrate by bringing random information in, because he doesn't discriminate, so he brings it all in, I'm not distracted because my senses are occupied with the same stream of information. So learning styles, not much of a thing, that's been debunked. But what is, for me personally, something I'll highly recommend is maximize sensory input. When you're trying to work through your memory, your working memory, use your muscles. Skip like that chick from Aquila and the Bee. When she was spelling, you hear the sound, the beat of the skipping rope going tung, 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 tung. I can't give an example of how she spelled any of those words. Those words are crazy. I can't even spell cinnamon. So, but she skips and she spells, so she's using her muscles, she's using her hearing, she's using her mouth, she's speaking. I mean, that is essentially what we want when we're doing brain gym, is to maximize our sensory input, all streaming in one channel of information. So when it gets into the working memory, you are so ready, your whole capacity in your working memory has that new information ready for you to encode. Okay, I got it. Let me see what I can do with it. Now, many times, even when people respect the working memory's capacity, which if I forgot to mention, never, ever, neurodivergent or neurotypical, never go over 15 minutes at a time. If you're taking in new information, you're studying, and you get a new chapter, do it in chunks, break it up, make sense of it, stop, sit back. What did I just, and that's when you're chewing the apple, right? What did I just read? Do I make, okay, I understand that, okay, perfect. And then encode and back it into your long-term memory. If you're neurodivergent and you struggle with attention, try and focus on 10 minutes, perhaps, instead of 15 minutes, which might be a little bit more doable. And then say, okay, do I get it? Do I understand it? Okay, good. I got it. There it is. I got it. I understand. It's like that. Talk to yourself, the dialogue of self. If it is difficult to speak to your working memory, your own voice in your head, say it out loud. Maximize sensory output then. Now you're using your senses to reiterate and rehearse. Remember I told you the number? Here's the number. You had to rehearse. The more you do that, the more solidified that encoding becomes. So then, when it moves from working memory, it's going to hop over then into your long-term memory, into your brain's library. And the key of this, and this is the most important part, this is where I normally tell people, okay, now you're 50% of the way through brain gym. The key is, your brain is much like a garden. If I'm going to put in new information and I plant the seed, that seed is not going to grow by itself. You need to keep on retrieving it, fetch it, use it, fetch it, use it to strengthen that neural pathway. If you plant that seed and forget about it, homie, he's going to forget about you too and he's going to die. Your brain is going to prune him. Literally, it's called pruning when your brain says, oh, why must I keep him alive? We're not using it. Just like grade 7 content that I studied. No one remembers that. Pruned it, it's gone. So if you want to keep information alive, you have to practice to retrieve it. Go fetch it, talk about, okay, back it away. You don't want your library to have dust on the books. If you're talking about studying for prelims, hypothetically, what would that look like in a study regime? It would look like taking 1 whole week, you take just reading, understanding your information. Nobody is making study cue cards. You are not doing that. That's not what we want from you. What we want from you is to read, understand, make sense. Read with as many sensory inputs as possible. Read, understand, take the information in, process it. Once you have processed it, I want you to encode it. And by encoding it, when you're trying to enforce the encoding, write down a keyword that represents the bigger body of information. The keyword is supposed to be the cue. Like at a roadblock and you have the signs that says turn that way for that and that way for that. The keyword must just say the information you're looking for is down that road, bro. That's what the keyword is for, so that when you are rehearsing it, you look at the keyword and your brain is forced to go and fetch that information every time. There's no shortcuts. There's no long notes where you're just rereading. So what are you practicing then? Your writing ability and your reading ability? Because we're not practicing how to use our senses, we're practicing how to pack it away in our we're trying to practice how to pack it away in our long-term memory and retrieve it and use it, right? So then what we do, we read the information, make sense of it 15 minutes at a time, never more than that, don't forget that. Use as many senses as possible to get that information, make sense of it, and then allocate a keyword. But we need to make sure that the keyword can, in fact, retrieve that information from our long-term memory. Go to the librarian and say, my keyword is the water cycle. Then she must be able to go into your brain's library and go fetch. The water cycle is first the sun will warm the water and then it will evaporate in water vapor. Something like that, And that's what we want from you. One keyword or little phrase must retrieve a full body of information, not you rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. So 1 week, it takes you around about 1 week to do that. The second week is simply just practicing to go fetch that information, over and over, retrieve. In the third week, you're just practicing to use that information. So not only are you then practicing the skill of retrieving the information, but you're practicing the skill of retrieving and applying it. Now, always ask this question. This is the most valuable question. What's the definition of intelligence? And many other kids will say, intelligence is the ability to know a lot of things. You just know things about lots of things, general knowledge. But knowing stuff is 50% of intelligence. The other 50% is the ability to solve problems. The escape room is one big intelligence test. So you that's going to write a mathematical intelligence test, a English intelligence test, a natural science intelligence test must then not be 50% of the way prepared, i.e. only studying and knowing the content. You must also practice to apply it, right? So then the question is, how does working memory look or in the workplace? Is if you understand that as a neurodivergent, it's very difficult for you to remain focused and to remain on task, the best thing to start with is minimizing your sensory input. Minimizing sensory input means that you are able to find the cheat notes, the cheat codes for that filter that doesn't want to do his job. So my bouncer that's just letting everybody in, I just confuse him by letting everybody in of the same information just in all of my senses at once. So you can do the same thing in your office. Maybe think about getting noise cancellation earphones. When I used to work in an office space where there were many other people, because now I work on my own in my own office, so it doesn't affect me much. Then I used to always have noise cancellation earphones on. And that time it wasn't really a thing, so people always thought I was listening to music. And then I was like, no, I'm not listening to anything. I'm just cancelling the sensory input. Or maybe you do want to listen to something so that it really cancels it out by maybe some white noise or something of the sort. So just being mindful of what is going on when I'm trying to focus, what is distracting me, what can I minimize and what can I maximize. Should I use all of my senses to bring in one stream of information, like letting the PDF read aloud to me, or when I need to type a document to do voice to text? Figure out the ways that you can accommodate yourself within your workspace, right? And then perhaps maybe even if you are in a meeting and they're running a little bit long-winded, you can say to your boss, could we try and do it in 15-minute increments and just do a little kickback? Let's just understand what we did in the last 15 minutes so that I don't get lost. Which, if you have ADHD, this is the new argument in South Africa, because neurodiversity is so new to the South African dialogue, if I should put it that way. that lots of people are of the opinion that ADHD is simply a condition and not a disability. The law doesn't think so, by the way. If any condition affects you in such a way that it makes it difficult for your work, for you to function within your capacity of your work, then it does become a disability. And SARS recognizes that too, by the way, but there's a whole nother conversation. So having ADHD, having autism can give you a disability if it's affecting your ability to work optimally. Then you are allowed to, before you get to the point of HR, you are allowed to say, could we not have long meetings like that? Or could you just stop and just refresh every 15 minutes so that I can just, or could we have a break? Or could I have the agenda that I could make notes? Or could I stand up and move around, etc.? There are accommodations that are available for you. But the key of everything is that when you're aware that your filter is not filtering but just letting everything through, that the best way is that if everything's just gushing through, that you're using as many senses as possible so that what's gushing through is the same information and is not knocking each other off of the table and not overflowing your working memory's capacity. Now, let's bring it home. How do we apply this as maybe a stay-at-home mother? And I like using this the most because it's the most real to me. And we haven't spoken about it today because that's another discussion. But because the filter is broken, the sensory overload is a very, very real reality. And so understanding that because your sensory neurons are giving you sensory input the entire time, you need to try and lull that a bit. Now, if you're a stay-at-home mother and your beautiful babies are busy around you all the time with their gorgeousness and their cuteness, it does sometimes become a little bit overwhelming. And you need to be aware of that, and you need to understand why. It's not because you're a bad mom. It's not because you don't like hearing your children have fun. It's because it just gets a little bit much. And then you must understand yourself before you get to that point to say, maybe I need to just stick my loomies into my ears for a little bit. Or if you don't have looms, you can literally use press stick, by the way, to press into your ears to just noise cancellation a little bit. Or perhaps I just need to go take a warm bath. Or perhaps, there are so many ways around it, but understanding that if your filter is not broken and you are a stay-at-home mother and little children, do not stop. That you're getting this constant input of high-pitched singing, fun, squealing, crying, hunger the entire day long. And it's amazing and you love your children, but you do need a little bit of a filter. You need to help your filter a little bit. And sometimes when your children are trying to communicate with you, you can be more present and less stimulated by going eye level with them, cupping their face and making visor between you and them so that you are present in that moment. I'm hearing only you. I'm seeing only you. I'm present with only you in that moment so that you can be that amazing mommy you want to be, that you are, or daddy, and mitigate that overwhelm, that sensory overload. Sometimes just going, okay, I'm back. So we can, at a later stage, speak about managing our sensory overload as parents, because that's real and that's every day. But there are ways around it, and understanding how you get information into your brain and how your brain responds to that information is important. So this is a good place for us to start with, especially given that our students are on the brink of prelims. And we as humans and neurodivergents in general do need to understand how our brain is taking information in so that we can work on what we do with that information once it comes in. And that's basically information processing theory in a nutshell. There's so much more that could be said, like so much more. But I want this to be informative and not just me rambling and worried about the rain the whole time, So there's a lot more that can be said. But I think this was enough to get going. And I'd like to thank you so, so much for joining us. And don't forget that we do have a community where we can share our experiences and talk, our safe place that we've created on Facebook for Neurodivergence of South Africa, called Neurodiversity Support Group on Facebook. And we'd love to see you there and hear what you have to say and ask your questions, because when questions are asked, questions are answered on the podcast, and we'd love to feature you. Next week, we're very excited to interview another amazing neurodivergent of South Africa. So I hope to see you there. Have a lekker day. Anyway, then if she... blah, blah, blah. If she... what the flippin' hell? Okay, then... Okay,